Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live stream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. In this episode, I'm joined by another brilliantly talented individual. This time, it's the turn of Scottish singer-songwriter Allison. We talk about her collaboration with Paul Weller at the end of the noughties, recording at Black Barn Studio, aka Weller HQ, and her return to music via an incredible album, Heart-Shaped Scars. The sleeve notes for which thank Mr. Weller himself. We'll find out why. So let's get into it. Allison, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Where in the world do we find you? I'm guessing north of the border.
Yes, I'm in Edinburgh.
Oh, lovely part of the world. What a city.
I lived in London for 20 years, actually, but then just moved back 7 years ago. So yeah. So I'm a sort of adopted Londoner as well.
So looking forward to chatting with you about all of your connections with Paul, your career, your music, which is fabulous as well. So first of all, let's kick it off. As it's the Paul Weller Fan Podcast, when was it that you first became aware of the music of Paul Weller? Would it have been the Jam, the Style Council solo?
It would have been the Jam. Although I guess when the Jam started out, I would have been under 10. So it was just like my awareness of pop music. And yeah, so it was the Jam. It was the Jam, yeah.
You weren't a 10-year-old punk though, right?
No. Wasn't. But I mean, I guess I've been aware of him ever since, although I was really struck by his solo albums, actually. Although I had some of his music on vinyl, it was when he put out the Paul Weller album. I actually heard it was a remix of Cosmos by Brendan Lynch. I think it was called Lynch Beat Bonus Mix or something like that. And that really struck me in the 90s. So it's like I'd loved the Jam and the Style Council, but then it kind of like I was sort of lapel grabbed by his solo music as well.
Love it. We're going to hear about obviously your connections with Paul and working with Paul throughout this as well. Am I right in thinking that you, in terms of your own music, you come from a really musical family? Would that be right?
Yeah, that's right. My mum was the head of music at a school in Edinburgh, and my aunt was a cellist and a music teacher. They're retired now. So yeah, I guess when I was a child, we always had a couple of pianos in the house. One was like, they were both slightly battered, actually, uprights. And then there was like, my mum would like brought a guitar back home, and then at one point a drum kit appeared. You know, there's always like little recorders lying around it. But although it's funny, I think for my mum, because she was teaching music and kind of, I guess, making a noise, a musical sound all day. So when she came in, I think it was probably a bit of a sort of busman's holiday to then put on music. So I seem to remember I would be playing music in my room, but my mum would be like kind of, you know, just probably needing a bit of peace, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't like, I mean, I got introduced to quite a lot of music by my family, but in the house, it was more like classical albums. And then my dad introduced me to more pop, I guess, and, you know, old rock and roll and, sort of early pop. And then my aunt gave me a stack of records in my teens that she'd listened to when she was in her teens. And that was like Sandy Shaw, Marvin Gaye, The Temptations, Dusty Springfield, Vertigo compilation, and Roy Orbison. And then I've got a twin brother, and I think he had really good taste in music, actually.
I hadn't realised you were one of a twin, because Paul's got twins as well, hasn't he?
Yes, that's right.
So is that something you've talked about at all? Is that something you touched on?
Well, I've met one of his little boys. I don't think I've spoken too much about being a twin myself. I maybe mentioned it, but yeah.
Okay. And then your musical career, this wasn't the initial plan, was it? I guess you kind of stumbled into this, or because at one point you were a chemical engineering student. So I'm guessing you were thinking you were going in a completely different direction than music, right?
Yeah, I think I hadn't found, without sounding sort of a bit naff and self-helpy, I don't think I'd kind of found myself in a way, like, because I think I remember when I was choosing my exams at school, I was like, right, I'm going to do English and art, but then I'm also going to do sciences because I don't really know what I want to do. And, and then, I had a certain, I guess, propensity for science. Like my dad was a biochemist, actually. So some of it, when I was growing up, he would take me and my twin and mum, we'd all go on family forest walk or whatever. And he'd be talking about some of the plants with like the genus and the species. And,
right.
So it was kind of in my DNA a wee bit to be certainly into nature and also sort of into the biology and botany. He was a botanist. It wasn't until I started studying biochemistry that I even learned that biology is like the study, and bio is life. It's like the study of life. I was like, oh yeah, that's what but no, but I've always kind of, I guess, been interested in that. So I kind of thought I'll leave that open, and I didn't know if I wanted to do, like, I don't know, like psychiatry. I did my work experience at Royal Edinburgh, and I read this book called The Janine Quadruplets in my teens, and I read The Divided Self, R.D. Laing. So I was quite interested in the mind and the space between people and science and nature and all that from quite early on. But then I was always musical, so I was always like playing the piano. But it was almost like, it's funny because having a mum who made a career out of music, but as a teacher, it was like, it just almost didn't occur to me that could be like a job to a degree. I don't know, it's funny. But then, or maybe I thought it could be, but not for me or something. So I always kind of kept those options open. And then, when I was a biochemistry student, then I met up with the guys in One Dove, and one of them engineered in the studio in Glasgow. And we used to go in the studio dead time and make music, and then kind of decided to put out our own record. And that's how that started.
Right, interesting. Well, look, and I would say the rest is history, but my goodness me, what an amazing catalogue of music, from that initial One Dove stuff to your debut album to so Afterglow to We Are Science. Beautiful music that you've produced. I'm going to spend a lot of this chat talking about your latest album because it's an incredible piece of work, and I don't, without wishing to embarrass you, but wow, what a remarkable piece of work. But let's take the little journey to get there. I think I'm right in saying, I think the first time that I really became aware of you would have been through a link with Mr. Weller. It was an album, Death in Vegas. This would have been like 2002, I think. The third album by Death in Vegas, Scorpio Rising, an absolute corker. And it's really interesting because Paul Weller's there, track 8, So You Say You Lost Your Baby. And then straight after, an original track from you, Richard Fearless, Tim Holmes, called Diving Horses, which is brilliant. So I love the fact that you're connected, the two of you together. So tell me about that. I mean, obviously there are two separate tracks, but the fact that you're both on the same album was brilliant.
Actually, it was Weatherall introduced me to Gene Clark first, and I loved Gene Clark because I think he wrote that, didn't he? This is where the fact that I'm not a train spotter is really evident. I love Gene Clark. Did he write that? But no, I really, really love Gene Clark, and that particular song as well. Weatherall had put that on tape for me years before Paul covered it on the Death in Vegas album. Yeah. So I guess that's when our paths sort of crossed, although we didn't meet at that point. But I guess he would have been made aware of me, maybe maybe he was before from One Dove, but
and then Richard, the guy behind that, Richard Fearless, who worked with you on your debut album as well, also remixed Paul as well. There's a track called Super Lekker Stone that he remixed for Paul. So there's these kind of connections as we go through. But I want to talk about 15 years of music releases behind you. We have this wonderful album, Room 7.5, and you're moving away from that kind of electronica sound that had made you famous and to this much more stripped back guitar sound. How did the collaboration with Paul come about? And am I right in thinking he texted you completely out of the blue?
Yeah, he did. I was with my mum, and I used to live in Dalston in London, and I was with my mum, and I just suddenly got this text. I mean, like, we didn't, I didn't have his number or anything. It was just like completely out of the blue. And it just said, hi, it's Paul Weller. I'm with Bobby Gillespie. I hope you don't he says you're good. Should we write a song together?
Wow.
I know. And I'm sure I've told Paul this, but I said to my mum, I think somebody's winding me up. Like, I honestly thought, that can't be Paul Weller. Can't be Paul Weller.
Now you'd just think that's a spam text, wouldn't you? And you'd probably just delete it, right? Somebody trying to hack your account. Yeah.
Yeah. Sort of looking for your bank details at the end. Yeah. No, I was really shocked and really blown away and excited and slightly nervous. And, because even though we'd been on an album together, I think I'm quite shy. So I was like, wanted to do it and then thought, oh God, I hope I don't sort of embarrass myself. But no, it was really lovely. So then he said that he had a song that he wanted to kind of continue working on and would like to co-write on it to help complete it, called Love's Got Me Crazy. And so then we ended up kind of like texting ideas. And so it was like, we decided to sort of nail a few ideas via text, kind of like, I think this happens quite a lot where people kind of get the bones of something. And then once you're happy that you've got a bit of a direction for something, then you would meet up in person and sort of finish it, and that's what we did. So it was like a few texts it was lovely. He wrote a letter and sent it with the sort of explanation of, the sort of plans for this, for the collaboration. And then obviously I had the song, version of, and then we sent a few texts about, I think it was more like just finishing the lyrics and duetting. So yeah. And then once we got a few lines that we were happy with over text, then he said, we should come down to Black Barn and we'll kind of, finish it there and record it. And that's what we did. So yeah, it was
Brilliant.
cool.
I've just been watching the Beatles documentary, the Get Back thing. That's how I visualize music being made, where it's everybody in a room and you're bouncing ideas off each other. The fact that technology can do that, you can make that over text, is remarkable.
It was more like finalising a few lines so that you're not, I think the worst thing for me certainly is when you are in a room and you can't always predict how a writing session will go, obviously. So I suppose it's like you're not going in with like kind of blank sheet-itis, if you know what I mean. It's quite nice to just have a rough idea of where it's going, and then you're like, right, let's write this thing, So yeah, it was kind of the rudiments of something, and then, but I actually co-wrote with Hal David, Burt Bacharach's lyricist. And
wow, right.
Yeah, and because I asked him to write with me like in the 90s, and we co-wrote over fax first. It was that time. It's very sort of like, yeah. So, and it was interesting because it's funny how the process can be so strange, because he asked me to write some dummy lines because I'd written the music and he was writing the lyrics, and he was like, I'm just stuck on this line. Can you write me some dummy lines? And then that might trigger something. So I did and faxed them. Then he was like, thank you, good, right, we're off. But it just seems to be a way that can work,
That's brilliant. And I talked to Chris Difford on the podcast, and with Squeeze, they had a very different setup where Chris would write the lyrics and then he'd send them in the post to Glenn and Glenn Tilbrook, and then Glenn would write the music. And you were like, that seems like such, obviously everybody has their own way of working and their own ways of doing things, but yeah, creating a song on fax and text is brilliant.
The nature of songwriting itself, I find so sort of, it is literally, the possibilities are literally infinite. So it's kind of like, even within the canon of one person, I think you can have like so many different ways of writing a song. Like, it's not even as if I go, I'm always going to write like that. It's just a coalescence. And I think that coalescence can happen in a load of different ways. And yeah, it's just sort of feeling about in the dark for coordinates that may or may not be there.
I guess also from Paul's point of view, if you've been doing this, now it's 45 years since he had that first record deal with Polydor. You want to constantly be trying new things, doing things like, as much for yourself, if anything else, like doing things in different ways, I guess. Of
course, totally. I think I guess life itself is kind of like an evolutionary kind of a thing where you hopefully, it's a growth, isn't it? And so I suppose as a writer or as an artist, I don't want to just reinvent the same wheel all the time. You want to sort of kind of flourish in all different directions. And I guess you maybe find over the years that you've got strengths, but there might be lots of different ways that the strengths can kind of, or sort of sonic kind of, fingerprints that can kind of express something. But you can so hear that in obviously in Paul's canon of work, that it's like so sort of diverse.
This track in particular, did you know what it was going to be for, where it was going to go?
No, I didn't. I think he was just doing a lot of writing, and then it found its home in my album. But it's just, I think that's the thing, is when you're writing something, you almost just don't, I think it's quite good in a way not to have some sort of prescriptive plan for something. You can hope for something, but then it's weird certainly to speak for myself with my own albums, like I start with a batch of songs and I think this is the album. And then due to the nature of creativity, the ideas always keep surfacing and kind of, I use that word, coalescing. But for me, that's what it feels like. But then suddenly it's like, 6 months down the line, 3 songs that you thought were absolute no-brainers for an album project suddenly don't fit,
Right.
And it's like that just suddenly seems really alien with where the direction's gone, or your headspace has changed and so the sound has changed and then they're alien for that reason. Or, do you know what I mean? It's funny. It's like you don't know till you get there. I always think it's like driving with kind of dipped headlights. It's like you kind of know where you're headed, but you can just see as far as the lights take you at that point. And then, do you know what I mean? And then you get there. oh, so this is where we've ended up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, love it. Love it.
That's weird. I had a map for a different city, but anyway, that's fine.
The other thing, I don't know if you know, so this was Paul Weller's 22 Dreams. This was the deluxe version that I'm holding up here. Yeah. And on their side 2, we had like some demos and we had a few remixes and bits and bobs. And then there was a version which was him and I think it's Hannah, his wife.
Hannah, yeah.
Different lyrics as well. So
yes, because that pre-existed the one that we finished.
So that was the original version, right?
That was an earlier version. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was collaboration. So you mentioned Hal David earlier on, but there's been a lot of across your career which are really, really standout moments. People like Massive Attack, Pete Doherty, Scott Walker, like big names and stuff. I mean, presumably collaborating with people is something you enjoy.
Yeah, I feel a bit of a free agent in a way. Like I guess there's a sort of experimentation thing that can happen when you're working with someone that obviously wouldn't happen if you're sitting on your own. And it's not to say that has more or less value. It's just different. Do you know what I mean? And I think perhaps because I'm a twin, I'm not bad at sort of teaming up. You know, I'm not bad at I think it's just my nature is to twin in that sense. Like I think I'm okay with I hope I'm okay with collaboration. Don't go away going, oh my God, I'd never work with her again. No,
I've not heard that.
No. I wonder if being a twin is sort of part of that. But I just like the sort of different melting pot of ideas that you get with another brain on things, or you might go off on tangents that you wouldn't maybe have found yourself. And then there's something lovely, obviously, about a pure process of writing as well. But I think you've got to let the song win. If you try and sort of park your own, I don't know, like need for your idea to be the one at the door and do what's best for the song. That's what I find works. It's not often that I start off on my own and then think, oh, I have to bring somebody in. It's quite often I just like the idea of working with someone and then see where it goes, you know. So there's something quite kind of like having the accountability as well of working with someone that I quite like. But I think I'm much better than I used to be at that.
And how did you find the Black Barn experience? How did you find, so when you get in that room with Paul and you're making that music together face to face, how did that compare to those others that you've mentioned there or that I've mentioned there? And what was the studio like and all that?
Obviously, it's a fantastic studio with amazing vintage gear and bit of a trove of amazing kind of, which you would, of course, like you just collect your sound, I guess, don't you? And from a sort of, equipment tech point of view, it's obviously a really beautiful studio. What I found really notable was how kind of human and lovely and sort of down to earth and real everyone was actually. And I really mean that, I went in being quite shy, being quite nervous, to be honest, because I'm not one of those people that's sort of hugely, I don't know, alpha, if that makes sense.
Presumably you've only been texting to this point. Is this your first meeting when you end up going into Black Barn?
Yeah.
So, yeah, right, okay.
Exactly. So sort of like, but anyway, so it was so lovely that they're just, in my opinion, really lovely people, so that really made it easier. I had a really nice vibe. And yeah, I remember we sat in the control room and finished writing the song and his team were there and, just finished it. And then there was one line at the end of the song that we were sort of like, maybe. Anyway, so we finished writing it and then recorded it together. And it was like when you're both in the live room, completely kind of in the moment. So it's not like overdubbing. And do you know what I mean? It's kind of like a real performance. And that was pretty mind blowing for me to be sitting beside Paul's just singing together, and being recorded simultaneously kind of thing. And so, it's just an amazing experience, but made easier by them, the guys and Steve Craddock and everything. They're just sound, So, it was really, really nice. And I seem to remember learning actually from Paul about songwriting because he was searching for perfection in this one line that we were not entirely sure that it was nailing it as much as it needed to. And then we ended up rewriting the last line and improving it. That's what I like about collaborating as well, is because you always learn stuff, or I do anyway.
Yeah, just not settling and kind of until you're fully satisfied.
Yeah, and also what being quite important was the way the word scanned with the melody and stuff like that. And I was like, oh yeah, no, of course that. And then thinking of like, say, I don't know, That's Entertainment or one of those songs. It's like, yeah, of course, that's really locked. Like that makes total sense. Do you know what I mean? Or you can see how this really locks, and that's what part of the power of the sort of where it lands as chorus. Or, do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that was a good learning curve for me, and to be like, oh yeah, no, I want to think about that in future, so.
Now I have to say, I mean, such an enjoyable experience that it's then a massive gap between that and your next album.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me laugh because when you read articles about the new album and it's got amazing reviews, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but they often talk about you having a break. It's like, oh, she's been having a break for the last 9 years and not doing much. It's like, no, you went and had a family, right? That's the opposite of having a break.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right.
It's hardly a rest, is it? It's not like you had your feet up doing nothing. Bloody hell.
Busy doing, just very busy doing other things. Yeah.
What was it that made you want to come back with this album? And at one point, I read somewhere that you were you didn't think you'd come back to music.
Yeah, I didn't. Having a family and that being my absolute priority, to be available for my children, basically, and my family, my husband, but just being a mum. And I remember kind of thinking, I don't know, it was weird. It was like I kind of weaned myself off. Sorry, just using the word wean. But, almost like I found it a little bit difficult at first, but then to not do anything at all. No, that's not actually true. I would say when my kids were about 2 or 3, I noticed I was missing doing a wee bit of writing. And I did like the odd day of songwriting, like one day. But then I found I really was struggling not being with them even for that time. So then I thought, this is not going to work. I need to take 5 years off. Anyway, so I remember I was kind of working with a publishing company just round the corner from Blackburn, actually, funnily enough, our songwriting place called Metrophonic. And I remember saying to the gentleman, Brian, that runs that I'll probably have to take more time. I find it really hard from an emotional point of view to kind of switch off and go into a completely different part of London when my kids are really young. So I just stopped. I obviously, I'm not in the early stages of their life. I wasn't doing any of that. But even when they were like 3, I sort of thought, oh no, I'm not quite. It's me. I'm not ready. I don't know if they are. I'm not.
Yeah, they're fine.
Yeah, they're probably absolutely fine. Yeah, there was a couple of times when I was actually quite upset driving back in the car, and I was like, no, I'm not ready for this. So anyway, so I just thought, I'll just take a bit more time off. And then we ended up moving up to Edinburgh, and I thought, God, if I kind of like just stopped without kind of thinking that I am stopping. But it's weird. It's like, I'm just thinking of like chutes around concrete. It just finds its way. So like I ended up playing music up here with friends. My old school friends up in the island. We've got a cottage on a little island in the Inner Hebrides, and that's a very musical scene. There's like folk nights on the island, and my friend's son's a folk musician. There's just quite a network of folk musicians on the West Coast and in Edinburgh as well. So I ended up meeting a friend through my friend, Amy Bowman, who I duet on The Haunted with, and I heard her voice. I was like, oh my God, your voice is stunning. Do you fancy playing together or doing something? And she was like, yeah, why not? So I said, I've got these chords and a poem. So I gave her the chords to The Haunted and opened my computer, and the poem was like fully formed. She did most of the melody, like 90 odd %. And then we sang it together and I sort of embellished it together and stuff. And then once I'd written that, I remember thinking, oh God, I kind of want to do more now. And my kids are a bit older now. So it's sort of like in that headspace of being able to do that. So that was the beginning of it. Was just doing it and then thinking, oh, I kind of want to do something with this. I think I should do something with this song. And that's how it came about, that I was like, oh, am I making an album? I think I'm making an album.
What an album it is. I mean, I've got it here. It's the only, I tell you what, it's unique in my collection. It's the only one that I've got that's got green vinyl. You can get more, obviously all colours these days, right?
Yes.
And there are Weller connections with it as well. So we should talk about that as we talk through the album. Am I right in thinking around the time that you started making the album, there was a reconnection with Paul at Black Barn as well?
Yeah, it's funny because it was in 2018, the summer. It was like July or something. I had this thing of like, oh, I should reach out to people that I haven't spoken to. And actually I texted Paul. I texted a few people that I had kind of drifted. And not that I was closely in touch with Paul, but we were in touch. Actually, I should say that after we recorded Love's Got Me Crazy, in those sessions, he very, very, very kindly said, if you wanted to do an album, you can use, when I'm on the road, I'd much rather the studio was turning and not kind of literally gathering dust. So I think he quite likes, it's like keep the heartbeat going of the studio when he's not there kind of a thing. And so he offered for me to do Room 7.5 in that studio, which I did. Paul being so kind to to sort of offer that. So yeah, it was mental. So we'd been in touch around me doing the album in there. Anyway, so we've been talking about that. And then that was the last I'd kind of spoken to Paul, was around me going into Blackburn and working and stuff when he was away. And then, so I reached out to him in 2018 around summer, and then we were sort of back in touch. So that was nice.
Nice. So did he just invite you down to Blackburn to meet up for a cup of tea, or? Yeah,
he was just like, oh, nice, how's family? And, nice to be back in touch. And if you're in London, catch up. And so I did. And yeah, he was doing a gig at the Union Chapel. It was like a charity night. So I went down to that, and that's when I met his wee boy. And he was doing it was around True Meanings, which I absolutely adore that album. Such a beautiful album. So he did a few songs from that at the Union Chapel, and that was the first time I met up with him after that big gap. So yeah. Right,
brilliant. Okay. Well, you mentioned True Meaning, so let's get into this. So what was it, last summer, wasn't it? July time last year, Heart-Shaped Scars, your first album in, over a decade. So I've got so many questions about this. I mean, first of all, did it feel like you kind of picked up where you left off? You mentioned this gap and this kind of, did it feel like suddenly you're back in the, I don't know, whether, back in the music industry and this business and stuff, or was it all on your own terms?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I came back saying I'm not doing any press, I'm not doing a gig, I'm not doing any of it. And I have actually, I've done press and I've agreed to do a gig. So almost like, I kind of like...
You're full of it.
No, but I do struggle really badly with like performance. I will be gripped with fear. I mean, I'm more doing it because I feel I should do it rather than, but it's like I'm trying to be a bit braver than I was when I started back making music, if you know what I mean. Because at the beginning I was like, right, that's it, I'm just going to put it out and not do anything. And then it's probably me being a bit codependent. I'm like, oh, all right. But no, like I think I owe it to people that have bought it to do it. You know what I mean? Like I think
also you owe it to the record as well, because it's it needs to be heard. It's a terrific piece of work.
Oh, thank you. I know, I don't know why I'm so shy performing. It's just my makeup, but I know that if I do it, it'll get easier. So that's why I've agreed to do it. And it's just, I think it's the block after having a bit of a gap, but people do get over these things.
On the album, there are special thanks to Paul Weller, one of the many people mentioned. Why did he get called out on this album?
Well, he suggested I work with Hannah Peel, actually. And then I realised, because I was saying I'm not really much for Trainspotter, really. But then I realised I love her arrangements because they're on True Meanings, so it's like, oh, no, that makes complete sense. So he just said, oh, you should check in with Hannah. She's amazing. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, she is amazing. No, like I already love her work, I realised. So I contacted her. And it was on Paul's recommendation. And I just think she's incredibly talented and she's so lovely. And I was just made up that, because basically the songs that she arranged on they just existed as me on ukulele with voice when I sent her those versions of them. So I was really thrilled when she got back and she was like, oh, these are really beautiful, definitely, do something. And I was over the moon.
Nice. Well, she's been on the podcast. Hannah's another super talent. I mean, just brilliant, isn't she?
I knew that she did. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, she was so good. I mean, that was one of my favorite podcasts, because I entered her studio. There was us on Zoom, and you could see this is where the magic happened. It was just fascinating.
Absolutely,
she's brilliant.
Yeah.
And then there's Fiona as well. So Fiona Cruikshank, who's a producer who's worked as string engineer for Coldplay, but also for Paul Weller. So another connection on your album too.
Yes, absolutely. And Fee just came recommended by a mutual friend who's just saying like one of the best engineers in London, Fiona Cruikshank. And then it was just purely by chance. She also happened to work with Paul, and it was like... She
might work with you before she worked with Paul, I think, because it was on the Sunset, wasn't it? Yeah.
I seem to remember it was around that time. She was like, guess who I was talking to? Yeah. But she's brilliant. I mean, her email just popped up, actually. No, she's absolutely brilliant, and we're going to work together in the future again. So, yeah.
So talk me through this album. So I'm going to read a couple of the reviews, folks, as well, because this was on at the end of last year, this was on all of the best of year lists. Amazing reviews. Everybody loved it, which must be really satisfying when your work goes out there and people enjoy what you do, right? An album of quiet delights is one of them. An elegantly understated comeback. A thing of magical soap bubble delicacy, closer to ambient folk than the electronica with which she made her name. There's another one that said honeysuckle, like a flower blooming out of concrete, which I thought these are just terrific.
Yeah.
If the album were to have a theme, for me, it's one of those albums, and it's similar. It reminds me of Hannah's album from last year as well. It's headphones on. It's you on your own. It's you. It's as much mindfulness as it is anything else to me. It's like it's just calm, and it's like, oh, this is so lovely. It just takes you away from the chaos of our bloody lives. Was that the intention?
Yeah. Do you know, I consciously wanted it to feel like an embrace, like a containing kind of embrace feeling of an album, and a bit of a cry from nature as well. It's interesting to think of humans as, it's like human supremacy. I mean, we talk about other types of supremacy, but actually, I was thinking recently about, like, say, with what's going on in Ukraine and the threat of some sort of nuclear disaster, and thinking, why is it that human beings think we have the right to just completely, like, create a barren dust for other species, you know, as bad for our own, of course. But there's all these other species that don't have any say. So I suppose there's a bit of me feels like the planet's kind of crying out for, like, just stop deforesting. Even, I suppose, even with electric cars, it's like the amount of forests that get flattened to make wood pellets, to make electricity, to fuel these electric cars. And then you've got these ecosystems that are so sort of incomprehensibly beautifully complex, kind of intra-connected systems in nature just get nuked. And they're like, have taken like hundreds, thousands of years to form. And why do humans think it's okay for us to just go, you know? There is a bit of me, it's just like, if I as a human can somehow express something that might make us think about that, even if it's like now in an interview, it doesn't even need to be like literally like this sort of lyric of the record or something, but then I would want to do my little bit to say that, you know. And I suppose there's a heartbreak in the album, but I think it's also a symbolism for, in a way, this sort of heartbreak of what's happening to this planet. I remember listening to Nico Philosopher, and he was talking about the murder of a planet. I was like, yeah, it's a living thing. It's like we're murdering it. Stop. That's all stuff that's sort of in my mind while I'm writing, you know, kind of what they sort of take the form of your traditional sort of song structures and concepts or whatever. But actually there's a sort of, there's a bigger picture that feels like it within my concept behind it or whatever, that I was thinking it's sort of quite nice to have something that's kind of an embrace and a tonic, an appeal almost as well.
It was interesting, that first lockdown we had in, when would it be, March 2020. And actually I remember reading an interview with Paul talking about something similar, where it was like, you got the sense then when we're all locked in, we can't drive anywhere. It was almost like nature suddenly then started repairing itself, and suddenly, you know, the birds were tweeting more than ever before. It was kind of, so you kind of realize, you know, once we've screwed it up, and undoubtedly we're going to, they will return, because do you know what I mean? Like, the nature will kind of heal itself. The planet will heal itself. It's just we're too idiotic to realise that actually we should be doing more to save it right now.
Except I wonder, I mean, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I wonder, I think if you leave like desert, it's quite hard for it to come back. So it really, I think, depends what we leave in our wake as to how much it can replenish with the laws of nature, you know, and that's the thing I think I would like to think about, is I don't see humanity kind of suddenly doing a U-turn, you know. That's the thing that I find difficult. It's a wee bit like that Don't Look Up, you know.
Yeah, it is.
But with the kind of, you know, destroying nature sort of version, if you know what I mean. What do you do? Anyway, it's just, I think it's good to talk about it and think about it, because the more people talk about it and think about it, then the more chance you've got of doing something about it. But yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. And the arrogance is really strange. The use of those things in your album were really powerful for me. So the use of birdsong, the use of rivers and the sound of the sea and those kind of things really bring it to life and build, and this wonderful picture that you kind of, you're taken off somewhere else when you're listening to it. It's magical. But and I'm guessing that was the intention as well, to kind of weave in the nature to the LP.
Yeah, totally. To be the voice. It's like, it's almost like you're duetting with nature a wee bit. I guess the lyricism with sound almost, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, totally. It's like a map. You're collaborating with that, I suppose. Yeah.
I imagined you wandering around the moors and like you mentioned the Hebrides, like the Outer Hebrides with a little tape recorder collecting all these field recordings and stuff. Was that how some of it worked?
Yes, that was exactly how it
You in your wellies in a big coat, it's freezing cold, and I'm imagining you there with your phone or a little Zoom recorder thing recording stuff. Yeah,
it was.
Yeah,
it was
brilliant.
Handheld. Yeah, no, it was. And I got up quite early. I went up to the cottage on my own and got up quite early and just went for this mad walk around the coast of the island. And I was like streams and cliffs and collecting sounds. It was really magical. It was like, it's so weird. Suddenly you can sort of turn a kind of a corner of sorts around a cliff and suddenly you can't record anything because it's like a force 10 gale or something that wasn't evident when you started your walk. And actually recorded quite a bit in Edinburgh. There's some seriously beautiful bird song not far. So I kind of went out here as well and then just dumped everything onto 2-inch tape and Castle Sound and just tried to get rid of the wind, kind of like nuked the signals and see what was left and then make something with the clips that were left. So
brilliant. Yeah. Well, look, it's a remarkable piece of work. Obviously, you mentioned the Hannah connection and Paul recommending it to you. What did Paul say about the album then when he heard it?
Yeah, he loved it. He loved it. Because I sent him the Hannah tracks early just because of his kind of being part of that in a way. Yeah, he's so supportive, but he was like, wow. And he said, you mentioned Vashti Bunyan and yeah, he was really, really, really lovely about it. And then he said in Mojo at the end of the year, you know, they sort of say what is your favourite albums of the year or whatever, but he had Hannah Peel and my album in there as well. So yeah.
Nice. I have to ask you, more recently than that, there's this brilliant remix that's come out of one of the tracks, the penultimate track on the album, Love Died in Our Arms. How the heck did this come out? I mean, I'm a big fan of the On You Sound record label, so anything to do with Lee Scratch Perry, I love. This kind of came out of nowhere. Suddenly one day on your social media, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, this was the final work of Lee Scratch Perry. He remixed the track.
I know.
Bloody hell.
I know. Well, he had put on Twitter that he was looking to do some remixes. And that was how I found out that it was Anton Newcomb, because I'm working with Anton on a project. And I mean, Dub has been an influence since the very beginning. And actually, like, I was thinking, because obviously he invented that genre and so much, like, because even on People Funny Boys, arguably the first ever sample of a baby crying and stuff, and it's just like, wow. Anyway, and obviously these reggae and dub being the precursor and to so many different genres, or the parent of musical children or whatever they say, you know. So yeah, I reached out to him and he had a listen and said yes, and was so lovely, and like started remixing the song. And then I wrote to him to ask how it was going. There'd been a wee bit of a space of a gap, and he wrote back and said, oh yeah, no, it's going really well. And then I was just waiting. I didn't want to kind of, you know, put any pressure at all, sort of thing. So yeah, I just left that. And then suddenly it was in the press. It was on Twitter that he'd passed away. Anton texted me to say, because I'd come out of the cinemas with my kids, actually it was in the summer, and then got this text and I was like, oh no, that's, you know, it's devastating. And I just thought I wouldn't ask about, I just let it be, obviously just forget the mix, and, you know. But then his wife wrote to me and said that it was the last thing that he worked on in his life. And yeah, mad. Wow,
that's so special to have that as a final thing, isn't it? Gosh, I mean, remarkable artist, and just, I mean, by the sounds of things, everything he did in terms of the studio, so prolific, but completely bonkers in terms of his way of working, but so brilliant. A lot of the output, and even like Bob Marley's best stuff came from me, you know, from working with Scratch Perry, right?
Yeah, I know. And I guess it's that, maybe with that mindset goes that capacity to invent, you know. And even like before finding out that he was up for doing a remix and asking and stuff, I'd got a Space Echo out in the studio, recorded something, played it through all the live recorded and printed all the effects through the tape echo, and then took out the original signal, then used the dub effect to just become the part and everything. That's all him, you know what I mean? Like, and it's things that you take for granted. Well, I take for granted to a degree, like just knowing that you can do that. Do you know what I mean? But he's invented that, and people, it's like a technique.
Yeah, if it wasn't for him like innovating and messing about and
exactly.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Hey Dot, this has been so lovely. I've loved speaking to you. I have to say the album's brilliant. I'll put it in the show notes as well, and links and details to it as well. But I have two final questions for you before you go. So you're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be The Jam, The Style Council, or solo. What are you going to go with?
I think it would be You Do Something to Me. Oh, it's just always made me want to cry. I just love that song.
And then final question. So the purpose of this podcast is to meet amazing people like yourself, to talk to people who have these connections with Paul and have done over the years. But it's also for me to get the interview with Paul Weller that I never managed during my radio career. If it happens at the end of this podcast series, what should I talk to him about? What should I ask him?
Oh my gosh. I guess if there were any musical aspirations what would be his dream to fulfill? Because where do you go? I'd be interested to know.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because you think after, I get bored of stuff every few weeks. It's like, after 45 years, still having that desire to want to make new music and want to keep pushing forward and keep continuing with new stuff is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, totally. But I suppose that's the mindset of an artist, isn't it? Like he's going to keep mining and keep exploring and inventing. Yeah.
And are you already working on new music? Are we going to have as big a gap next time around, or?
No, I don't think there will be such a big gap. I'm quite a few songs into some other projects. Like it will be an album, but as I said before, like quite often you think you've got a plan for it and then you end up elsewhere. I have got a rough plan.
Okay. Well, I look forward to the culmination of that. But Dot, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
My thanks once again to the brilliant Dot Allison for joining me on the podcast. Find out more on my website, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. All the show notes, all the links to this episode there as well. Plus, new since we recorded that conversation, of a new 5-track EP of remixes of songs from her critically acclaimed 2021 album, Heart-Shaped Scars, including that Lee Scratch Perry remix, along with Anton Newcombe, St. Etienne, The Anchoress, and Loman Campbell. It's called the Entangled Remix EP. You can find out more details on my website in the show notes for this podcast, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. And whilst you're there, if you fancy buying me a virtual coffee or digging into some of our merchandise, yes, we have tees and sweatshirts and shopping bags galore. Just go to the store on my website, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Don't forget, share this episode of the podcast in your social media channels. It all helps to spread the word. You can get in touch on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook, Paul Weller Fan Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast, because next episode, I am delighted to be joined by musician, singer-songwriter, composer and record producer Rod Argent. A career spanning more than 50 years, Rod was the founder, the keyboardist, the leader of the English rock band The Zombies. You're going to love this one, trust me. Make sure you follow and subscribe, and thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.